Stephen Kennedy's hand trembles as he reaches for Zoe's scaled flesh, acutely aware that his next action could shatter years of careful diplomacy between humans and saurians. The opulent High Council chambers, adorned with gleaming reptilian motifs, fall silent as all eyes turn to the audacious human diplomat. Moments earlier, the reception celebrating the newly signed trade agreement buzzed with the quiet satisfaction of a deal well struck. Now the air crackles with tension. Stephen had noticed Zoe, a strikingly beautiful saurian female, hunched in a corner, her normally iridescent scales dulled with distress. "What's wrong?" he'd asked, drawn by an instinct to help. Zoe's reply came in pained gasps. "Biological process. Needs manual stimulation. No one will help. I'm too low status." Stephen's mind races. The trade agreement, years in the making, hangs by a thread, but the anguish in Zoe's eyes compels him to act. "I'll help," he offers, pushing aside thoughts of potential consequences. Zoe's eyes widen in shock. "You, a human? But you don't know how." "I'm a quick learner," Stephen responds, his voice steadier than he feels. As his fingers make contact with Zoe's scales, a collective gasp ripples through the chamber. Conservative saurian politicians hiss in outrage, while others watch with fascinated horror. Stephen focuses solely on Zoe, following her whispered instructions. To his surprise and Zoe's visible relief, the technique proves effective. Her scales regain their luster, and her breathing steadies. But as Zoe's discomfort eases, Stephen's troubles are just beginning. "Human!" a booming voice cuts through the chamber. High Counselor Zax, his scales flushed with anger, strides towards them. "You dare defile our customs? This trade agreement is null." Stephen straightens, mind whirling. He's stepped into a diplomatic minefield, and one wrong move could ignite an interstellar incident. Yet as he glances at Zoe's grateful expression, he can't bring himself to regret his decision. "High Counselor," Stephen begins, striving for a tone of respect, "I acted out of compassion, a core human value. Surely the ability to adapt and help others, regardless of species, is a strength worth considering in an alliance." Murmurs ripple through the gathered saurians. Some nod in agreement, while others bare their teeth in disgust. The chamber divides before Stephen's eyes, those intrigued by human adaptability on one side, those outraged by the perceived insult on the other. As the Saurian High Council demands an immediate explanation, Stephen realizes the gravity of his actions. He's inadvertently triggered a debate that could reshape human-Saurian relations. The trade agreement, meant to open new avenues of cooperation, now teeters on the brink of collapse. Yet amidst the chaos, Stephen can't ignore the newfound warmth in his chest when he looks at Zoe. Their momentary connection has sparked something unexpected, something that transcends species barriers. As he prepares to address the council, Stephen knows he's not just fighting for diplomacy anymore. He's fighting for the possibility of a deeper understanding between their civilizations. The next few moments will determine the future of human-Saurian relations, and Stephen Kennedy, with scaled dust still clinging to his fingers, stands at the heart of the storm. Stephen took a deep breath, steadying himself as he faced the High Counselor. The weight of his actions pressed heavily upon him, but he refused to back down. As he opened his mouth to further explain his position, a sharp voice cut through the tension. "Kennedy, my office now." Ambassador Marcus Thornton stood at the chamber's entrance, his face a mask of barely held back fury. Stephen glanced at Zoe, who nodded almost imperceptibly, before following the ambassador out of the room. The walk to Thornton's office was silent and tense. Once inside, the ambassador rounded on Stephen, his voice low and dangerous. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Years of careful negotiation, hanging by a thread because you couldn't keep your hands to yourself?" Stephen bristled. "Sir, with all due respect, I was helping someone in distress. Isn't that what we're supposed to do?" Thornton's eyes narrowed. "We're supposed to navigate delicate interspecies relations without causing an incident. Your help might have just set us back decades." As the ambassador continued his tirade, Stephen's mind wandered to Zoe. The memory of her scales under his fingers lingered, along with a strange warmth in his chest. Across the city, Zoe paced nervously in a sterile medical bay. Dr. Lyra, a tall saurian with emerald scales, studied a holographic display of Zoe's biochemical readings. "Fascinating," Dr. Lyra murmured. "Your body's reaction to the human's touch is unlike anything I've seen before. Tell me again, how did it feel?" Zoe's scales flushed a deeper blue. "It was different, intense but not unpleasant, almost like a surge of energy through my entire body." Dr. Lyra's eyes gleamed with scientific curiosity. "We may be on the brink of a significant discovery in interspecies biology. I'll need to run more tests." As Zoe underwent further examinations, political tensions in the capital reached a boiling point. Senator Kraz, a burly saurian with battle-scarred scales, addressed a crowd of angry conservatives. "We cannot allow these soft-skinned invaders to corrupt our ways," he roared. "It's time to expel all humans from our world." The crowd's approving roars echoed through the streets, reaching the ears of High Counselor Vex. The older saurian frowned, turning to his advisors. "We cannot let fear and ignorance dictate our policies," Vex said firmly. "Arrange a meeting with the human diplomatic team. We need to find a way to salvage this situation." In a dimly lit room across the city, Agent Sierra of the Shadow Scales received her new assignment. Her superior, a saurian with midnight black scales, slid a datapad across the table. "Your target is Stephen Kennedy," he hissed. "Infiltrate the human embassy. We need to know if this incident was part of a larger plot." Sierra nodded, her scales shifting to blend with the shadows. "Consider it done." Back at the human embassy, Stephen sat alone in his quarters, his head in his hands. The ambassador's words echoed in his mind, but they couldn't drown out the memory of Zoe's grateful expression. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. It was a message from Zoe. "Can we meet? There's something I need to tell you." Stephen's heart raced as he read the words. He knew he should decline, that any further contact could worsen the diplomatic crisis. But the pull he felt towards Zoe was undeniable. As he contemplated his response, another chime sounded. This time, it was an official summons from the Syrian High Council. They wanted him to testify about the incident. Stephen's fingers hovered over the message interface. To one side lay duty, protocol, and the weight of interstellar diplomacy. To the other, the promise of a connection that defied species barriers. In that moment, as he prepared to make a decision that could alter the course of human-saurian relations, Stephen realized that his personal feelings and his diplomatic responsibilities had become irrevocably intertwined. Whatever choice he made would ripple out, affecting not just his own future, but potentially the future of both species. The interface blinked, awaiting his response. Stephen took a deep breath and began to type. Stephen's fingers hovered over the interface for a moment longer before he made his decision. He quickly typed out a response to Zoe, agreeing to meet her discreetly at his quarters. The official summons from the High Council would have to wait. As night fell over the Saurian capital, Stephen paced nervously in his room at the human embassy. A soft knock at the door made him jump. He opened it to find Zoe, her scales dulled with worry. "Thank you for seeing me," she whispered, slipping inside. "I didn't know where else to turn." Stephen's heart raced as he closed the door behind her. "What's wrong, Zoe? Has something happened?" Zoe's eyes darted around the room before settling on Stephen. It's about what happened at the reception. I've been experiencing strange symptoms ever since." Stephen's brow furrowed with concern. "What kind of symptoms?" "Intense sensations, fluctuations in my body temperature, increased sensitivity to my surroundings," Zoe explained, her voice trembling. "Dr. Lyra has been running tests, and she thinks there might be some kind of unique interaction between human and saurian biology." Stephen's mind reeled at the implications. "That's incredible. But why come to me now?" "Dr. Lyra wants to run more tests, and she needs you there," Zoe said. "I know it's a lot to ask, especially with your testimony tomorrow, but—" "I'll come," Stephen interrupted, surprising himself with his own eagerness. "If there's a chance this could help improve relations between our species, it's worth the risk." Relief washed over Zoe's features. "Thank you, Stephen. We should go now, while the city sleeps." As they slipped out of the embassy and into the cool night air, Neither noticed the shadowy figure that detached itself from a nearby alleyway to follow them. The streets of the Saurian capital were eerily quiet as Stephen and Zoe made their way to Dr. Lyra's lab. The distant sound of voices raised in angry protest echoed from the city center, a reminder of the tension gripping the planet. "Things have gotten worse since the incident," Zoe murmured, her scales shifting nervously. "Senator Kraz has been stirring up anti-human sentiment. Many Saurians are calling for all humans to be expelled from our world." Stephen's teeth clenched. All the more reason to find out what's really going on between us. They arrived at the lab, a sleek building tucked away in a quiet corner of the science district. Dr. Lyra, a tall Saurian with shimmering emerald scales, greeted them at the door. "Quickly inside," she urged, ushering them into the sterile white interior. "We don't have much time." As the door slid shut behind them, Agent Sierra of the Shadow Scales melted out of the shadows across the street, her eyes narrowing as she watched the lab. Inside, Dr. Lyra wasted no time in beginning her test. She took samples from both Stephen and Zoe, analyzing them with advanced equipment that hummed and beeped in the background. "Fascinating," she muttered, eyes glued to a holographic display. "Stephen, your touch seems to release a compound that interacts with Saurian biology in ways I've never seen before. It's not just alleviating Zoe's discomfort. It's enhancing certain aspects of her physiology." Stephen and Zoe exchanged a look of surprise. "What do you mean, enhancing?" Stephen asked. Dr. Lyra turned to face them, her eyes bright with excitement. "Improved cellular regeneration, increased sensory perception. The potential applications are staggering. This could revolutionize medicine for both our species." Before they could process this information, the lab's security system blared to life. Dr. Lyra rushed to a monitor, her scales paling. "We've got company. A group of Saurians, heavily armed. They're forcing their way in." Stephen's heart pounded as he heard the sound of breaking glass and angry voices. "We need to get out of here, now!" Dr. Lyra grabbed a portable scanner and a handful of data chips. "This way!" she hissed, leading them towards a back exit. They burst out of the lab just as the intruders, led by a burly Saurian Stephen, recognized as Senator Kraz, stormed the main room. "Find the human and his conspirators," Kraz roared. "We'll put an end to their biological warfare." Stephen, Zoe, and Dr. Lyra raced through the darkened streets, the sounds of pursuit not far behind. "We need somewhere to hide," Zoe panted. "Somewhere they won't think to look." Dr. Lyra's eyes lit up. "The old temple on the outskirts of the city. It's been abandoned for years." With no better options, they made for the temple, weaving through back alleys and shadows to throw off their pursuers. As they ran, Stephen couldn't help but notice the way Zoe moved with newfound grace and speed, her senses seemingly sharper than before. They reached the temple just as the first rays of dawn began to color the sky. The ancient structure loomed before them, its once grand architecture now crumbling and overgrown. They slipped inside, finding themselves in a vast, echoing chamber. "We should be safe here for now," Dr. Lyra said, setting up her portable equipment on a dusty altar. "I can continue my analysis while we figure out our next move." As Dr. Lyra worked, Stephen and Zoe huddled together in a corner, their bodies close in the chill of the temple. "I'm sorry I got you into this mess," Zoe whispered, her scales flushing a deep blue. Stephen shook his head. "Don't be. Whatever's happening between us, it could be the key to bringing our species together." Outside the temple, hidden in the early morning shadows, Agent Sierra watched and listened. Her mission was clear, but as she observed the genuine concern and care between the human and the Saurian, doubt began to creep into her mind. Inside, Dr. Lyra's equipment beeped, drawing their attention. "I've confirmed it," she announced, her voice a mix of awe and excitement. "Prolonged physical contact between humans and Saurians could lead to significant medical breakthroughs for both species." As the implications of this discovery sank in, Stephen's mind raced. They had stumbled upon something that could change everything, but with Senator Kraz and his extremists hunting them, and Stephen's impending testimony before the High Council, how could they ensure this information reached the right ears? The answer came to Zoe, her eyes lighting up with a daring plan. "I know a way into the council chambers," she said, Secret passages, left over from ancient times. We could use them to present our findings directly to the council during your hearing. Stephen nodded, a mix of willpower and apprehension coursing through him. It's risky, but it might be our only chance. We need to move fast. As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave the relative safety of the temple, none of them noticed Agent Sira slipping away into the brightening day. The Shadow Scale agent had a decision to make, one that could alter the course of human-Saurian relations forever. With the city awakening around them and time running short, Stephen, Zoe, and Dr. Lyra set out on their desperate mission. The fate of two species hung in the balance as they made their way towards the heart of Saurian power, unaware of the forces gathering to stop them. The fate of two species hung in the balance as they made their way towards the heart of Saurian power, unaware of the forces gathering to stop them. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of amber and violet, Stephen, Zoe, and Dr. Lyra emerged from the temple's shadow. They moved swiftly through the awakening city, their senses on high alert for any sign of pursuit. "This way," Zoe whispered, leading them down a narrow alley. Her scales shimmered with an iridescent sheen, a testament to the changes occurring within her body. "There's an entrance to the old tunnels behind that abandoned storefront." Stephen's heart raced as they slipped into the dilapidated building. The musty air filled his lungs as Zoe pressed a hidden panel, revealing a dark passageway. Dr. Lyra activated a small light on her portable scanner, casting an eerie glow on the ancient stonework. "These tunnels date back to the early days of our civilization," Zoe explained as they descended. "They were used for everything from secret meetings to escape routes during times of conflict." The trio navigated the labyrinthine passages, the cool, damp air a stark contrast to the warming day above. Twice they were forced to duck into alcoves as patrol teams passed nearby, their voices echoing off the tunnel walls. Meanwhile, in the bustling streets above, Captain Sarah Chen led her team through the Saurian capital. "Any sign of him?" she barked into her comm unit, frustration evident in her voice. "Negative, Captain," came the reply. "The locals aren't exactly forthcoming with information." Chen gritted her teeth, all too aware of the hostile glares from passing Saurians. Senator Kraz's venomous rhetoric had done its work, turning the population against their human visitors. As the sun climbed higher, the High Council chambers filled with an air of tension. Senator Kraz took the floor, his battle-scarred scales gleaming under the harsh lights. "Esteemed council members," he began, his voice resonating through the chamber, "I come before you today with evidence of a grave threat to our people." He gestured dramatically, and a series of holographic images appeared, showing doctored scenes of human scientists experimenting on Saurian subjects. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the assembled Saurians. High Counselor Vex leaned forward, his expression grave. "These are serious accusations, Senator. If true, they would indeed warrant severing all ties with Earth." As the council began to deliberate, Stephen, Zoe, and Dr. Lyra finally reached their destination. They emerged from a hidden panel behind an ornate tapestry, finding themselves in a small antechamber adjacent to the main council room. "We made it," Dr. Lyra breathed, her scales flushed with exertion and excitement. Stephen peered through a gap in the tapestry, his blood running cold as he heard Kraz's words. "They're about to vote," he hissed. "We have to act now." Without hesitation, they burst into the chamber. Chaos erupted as Saurian guards moved to intercept them, but Stephen's voice rang out above the commotion. "Honorable council members, please! You're being deceived!" High Counselor Vex raised a clawed hand, silencing the room. "Mr. Kennedy, your timing is unconventional. What is the meaning of this interruption?" Stephen stepped forward, his heart pounding. "The accusations against humanity are false. We've discovered something incredible, something that could change everything." Dr. Lyra moved to Stephen's side, activating her scanner. "Esteemed Council, I am Dr. Lyra of the Saurian Science Academy. We have evidence of a unique biochemical interaction between humans and Saurians, one with immense potential for both our species." Kraz snarled, his scales flushing with rage. "Lies! More human deception!" "We can prove it," Zoe interjected, stepping into the center of the chamber. She turned to Stephen, her eyes meeting his. Show them." Stephen reached out, his fingers gently brushing Zoe's arm. The effect was immediate and stunning. Zoe's scales began to shimmer with an otherworldly radiance, casting prismatic patterns across the chamber walls. Dr. Lyra's scanner whirred to life, projecting a holographic display of Zoe's physiological data. As you can see, Council members, the human touch is triggering a remarkable enhancement in saurian cellular activity. Improved regeneration, heightened sensory perception, the potential applications are limitless. The Council members leaned forward, their expressions a mix of awe and skepticism. High Counselor Vex opened his mouth to speak, but before he could utter a word, a new voice cut through the chamber. "What they say is true." Agent Syrah materialized from the shadows, her midnight scales gleaming. "I've been observing them. Their discovery is genuine." Kraz, his carefully laid plans crumbling before him, let out a roar of fury. "Enough of this charade! Guards, seize them!" The chamber erupted into pandemonium as Kraz's supporters clashed with those swayed by the evidence. In the midst of the chaos, a group of armed extremists burst through the main doors, their crude weapons raised. "Death to the human conspirators!" one of them bellowed, charging towards Stephen and Zoe. Just as the situation seemed dire, Captain Chen and her security team stormed into the chamber from a side entrance. "Protect the Council and the ambassadors," Chen shouted, her team forming a defensive perimeter. The ornate Council chamber became a battlefield, with human and saurian security forces working in tandem to subdue the extremists. Stephen and Zoe found themselves cornered by a particularly vicious attacker, his eyes wild with hatred. In a moment of desperation, Stephen pulled Zoe close, shielding her with his body. The prolonged contact triggered an unexpected reaction. Zoe's body began to emit a blinding light, temporarily disorienting their attacker and allowing them to break free. As the skirmish died down, with the extremists subdued and Kraz's supporters restrained, an eerie quiet fell over the chamber. High Counselor Vex surveyed the scene, his expression unreadable. "In light of these extraordinary events," Vex announced, his voice cutting through the tension, "the Council will recess to deliberate on this new information. Mr. Kennedy, Dr. Lyra, and Zoe will remain under protective custody until we reach a decision." As they were led away, Stephen caught Zoe's eye. The intensity of their shared gaze spoke volumes, hinting at the profound connection they had experienced. Whatever the Council's decision, they both knew that their lives, and the future of human-saurian relations, would never be the same. The chaos in the Council chamber subsided, leaving behind a tense silence. Stephen and Zoe exchanged glances, their hearts still racing from the unexpected connection they had shared during the attack. As High Counselor Vex's words echoed through the room, a squad of saurian guards approached them. "This way, please," one of the guards said, gesturing towards a side exit. "We'll escort you to your temporary quarters." Stephen, Zoe, and Dr. Lyra were led through a series of winding corridors. The ornate architecture of the government complex, a stark contrast to the gravity of their situation. They arrived at a secure wing where a set of comfortable but closely monitored rooms awaited them. "You'll remain here until the Council reaches a decision," the guard explained, his tone neutral but not unkind. "Dr. Lyra, we've prepared a space for you to continue your research, as per the High Counselor's instructions." As the guards withdrew, leaving them alone in the common area of their new lodgings, Stephen turned to Zoe. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice infused with concern. Zoe nodded, her scales shimmering with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "I'm fine, but what happened back there? That light, that feeling, it was unlike anything I've ever experienced." Dr. Lyra, already busy setting up her equipment in the adjacent room, called out, "That's precisely what we need to investigate. Whatever occurred between you two could be the key to unlocking the full potential of human-saurian biochemical interaction." Over the next few days, Stephen and Zoe found themselves at the center of an intense scientific inquiry. Dr. Lyra, working tirelessly with her makeshift laboratory, devised a series of controlled experiments to explore the limits of their unique compatibility. During one such test, Stephen sat across from Zoe, their hands joined as Dr. Lyra monitored an array of sophisticated sensors. "Remarkable," she muttered, her eyes fixed on the scrolling data. Zoe, your cellular regeneration rate has increased by 200% with prolonged contact. And Stephen, your vital signs are showing significant improvements as well. As the experiments continued, Stephen and Zoe discovered that their connection went beyond mere physical touch. They found themselves increasingly attuned to each other's presence, able to sense subtle changes in mood and energy. One evening, as they rested between tests, Zoe suddenly sat up straight, her head tilted as if listening to a distant sound. "Something's happening," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Moments later, the door to their quarters slid open, revealing a stern-faced saurian scientist flanked by a team of assistants. "I am Dr. Kex," he announced, his scales a muted gray that spoke of his skepticism. "The High Council has tasked me with verifying Dr. Lyra's findings." Dr. Lyra emerged from her lab, her posture defensive. "My research is sound, Dr. Kex. I welcome your scrutiny." What followed was a grueling series of examinations, with Dr. Kex and his team subjecting Stephen and Zoe to increasingly complex tests. Despite his initial doubts, even Dr. Kex couldn't deny the evidence before him. "It appears," he grudgingly admitted after a particularly revealing experiment, "that there is indeed a significant biochemical reaction occurring between the human and saurian subjects. The potential applications are considerable." As news of their compatibility began to spread beyond the confines of their secure wing, Stephen and Zoe found themselves thrust into the center of a planet-wide debate. Saurian news broadcasts, which they were allowed to view, showed crowds gathering outside the government complex, their opinions sharply divided. "Look," Zoe said, pointing to the screen where a group of saurians held signs calling for increased human-saurian cooperation. "They're starting to see the possibilities." Stephen nodded, but his expression remained cautious. "Not everyone's convinced, though," he replied, gesturing to another group of protesters demanding an end to all human contact. Their moment of contemplation was interrupted by a flurry of activity in the corridor outside. Guards rushed past their door, their voices urgent but indistinct. "What's going on?" Stephen asked as Dr. Lyra entered the room, her face grave. "Senator Kraz has escaped custody," she informed them, her voice tight with concern. "He had help from within the security forces." The implications of this news hung heavy in the air. Kraz's escape not only threatened their safety, but also jeopardized the delicate political balance they had managed to achieve. As the days wore on, the pressure on Stephen and Zoe intensified. They were informed that the High Council was preparing to reconvene and that they would be called to testify once again, this time before the entire saurian population. "A live broadcast," Zoe murmured, her scales flickering with anxiety. "The whole planet will be watching." Stephen reached out, taking her hand in his. The now familiar warmth spread between them, a reminder of the bond they shared and the stakes they faced. "Together," he said simply, meeting her eyes. As they began to prepare for their crucial testimony, neither Stephen nor Zoe could shake the feeling that forces beyond their control were converging. Somewhere out there, Senator Kraz and his followers were plotting their next move, while the fate of two species hung in the balance. In the quiet of their secure quarters, with Dr. Lyra's equipment humming in the background and the weight of their responsibility pressing down upon them, Stephen and Zoe clung to the one certainty they had found amidst the chaos: each other. Other. As the weight of their impending testimony pressed upon them, Stephen and Zoe found solace in their shared dedication to see this through. The following days passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Dr. Lyra's experiments continued, yielding results that surpassed even her most optimistic projections. Stephen and Zoe's biochemical compatibility proved to have far-reaching implications, with potential applications in treating a wide range of saurian ailments. On the eve of the final High Council hearing, Ambassador Thornton paid Stephen a visit. The ambassador's usually composed demeanor was tinged with tension as he briefed Stephen on the volatile political climate. "The situation out there is precarious," Thornton said, his voice low. "Public opinion is sharply divided. Many saurians are eager to explore the medical potential of human-saurian interaction, but others fear it will erode their cultural identity." Stephen nodded, absorbing the gravity of the ambassador's words. Thornton continued, his gaze intense. Your testimony tomorrow is critical. The future of human-saurian relations hangs in the balance. We need you to convey not just the scientific facts, but the spirit of cooperation and mutual benefit that this discovery represents. As dawn broke on the day of the hearing, Stephen and Zoe were escorted from their quarters under heavy guard. The corridors of the government complex were abuzz with activity, security personnel lining every passage. As they approached the exit, the distant sound of chanting filtered through the walls. Stephen exchanged a glance with Zoe, her scales shimmering with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. The moment they stepped outside, the cacophony hit them full force. The streets of the Saurian capital were awash with both protesters and supporters, creating a sea of conflicting voices and emotions. Signs bearing slogans in both Saurian and human languages bobbed above the crowd, some welcoming the new era of cooperation, others decrying the perceived threat to Saurian independence. Their escort moved swiftly, guiding them through the throng towards the High Council chambers. As they ascended the steps of the imposing building, Stephen caught sight of religious leaders engaged in fervent debate with scientific advisors, their animated gestures a testament to the gravity of the situation. Inside the chambers, the atmosphere was no less charged. High Council members took their seats, flanked by delegations representing various Saurian factions. Military officials conferred in hushed tones, while religious leaders clutched sacred texts, their expressions somber. As the hearing commenced, Dr. Lyra stepped forward to present her findings. Holographic displays materialized around her, projecting vivid representations of cellular interactions and physiological data. Her voice, steady and authoritative, filled the chamber as she outlined the potential medical applications of human-saurian biochemical interaction. Esteemed council members, Dr. Lyra concluded, the evidence before you represents not just a scientific breakthrough, but a gateway to unprecedented advancements in Saurian healthcare. Dr. Kex and his team of Saurian scientists followed, corroborating Dr. Lyra's findings with their own data and analyses. The council members leaned forward, their expressions a mix of fascination and cautious optimism. As Stephen prepared to deliver his testimony, a distant boom shook the building. Confused murmurs rippled through the assembly, quickly replaced by shouts of alarm as the sound of energy weapon fire echoed through the halls. "We're under attack," a security officer shouted, rushing into the chamber. "Senator Kraz and his followers have launched an assault on the complex." Chaos erupted as council members and dignitaries scrambled for safety. Ambassador Thornton and Captain Chen sprang into action, coordinating with Saurian security to evacuate key personnel. "This way," Captain Chen called out, gesturing for Stephen and Zoe to follow her. They raced through corridors now filled with panicked government workers and the acrid smell of weapons discharge. As they rounded a corner, a massive explosion rocked the building, sending debris raining down upon them. Stephen instinctively pulled Zoe close, shielding her from the falling rubble. When the dust settled, they found themselves cut off from the main evacuation route, separated from Thornton and Chen. "We need to find another way out," Stephen said, helping Zoe to her feet. They navigated through damaged corridors and sealed emergency passages, the sounds of battle growing louder. Turning a corner, they stumbled upon a group of injured Saurian civilians, huddled in an alcove, caught in the crossfire of the attack. Without hesitation, Stephen knelt beside the closest victim, a young Saurian with a severe plasma burn on his arm. "It's okay," Stephen said softly, placing his hand on the Saurian's uninjured shoulder. The effect was immediate. The Saurian's pained expression eased, and the angry red of the burn began to fade. Zoe joined him, using her limited medical knowledge to assist where she could. As word spread of Stephen's healing touch, more injured Saurians appeared, seeking help. For hours, Stephen worked tirelessly, moving from one injured Saurian to another. The constant use of his ability began to take its toll, his movements becoming sluggish, his breathing labored. "Stephen, you need to rest," Zoe urged, her scales pulsing with concern. He shook his head, reaching out to help another injured Saurian. "I can't stop now. They need help." Unbeknownst to them, a Saurian journalist crouched nearby, her camera drone capturing every moment of their selfless actions. The footage streamed live to millions of viewers across the planet, the image of a human risking his own well-being to save saurian lives, striking a powerful chord with the audience. As Steven's condition worsened, Zoe made a split-second decision. She grasped Steven's free hand, initiating prolonged contact. To the amazement of onlookers, Steven's pallor improved, his movements becoming more fluid as Zoe's touch seemed to reinvigorate him. Their moment of revelation was cut short by a booming announcement that echoed through the complex's communication system. Senator Kraz's voice, filled with vitriol, declared that he and his followers had seized control of the High Council chambers and taken several council members hostage. Steven and Zoe exchanged a look of unshakable focus. They knew that the fate of both their species now hung in the balance. With renewed purpose, they began to formulate a plan to reach the council chambers and confront Kraz directly. As they prepared to embark on their perilous mission, Steven took Zoe's hand once more, their unique bond pulsing between them. Without a word, they understood the enormous stakes of their undertaking. The future of interspecies relations and the lives of countless individuals now rested on their shoulders as they set out to face the greatest challenge of their lives. Lives of countless individuals now rested on their shoulders as they set out to face the greatest challenge of their lives. As Steven and Zoe moved cautiously through the damaged corridors, they encountered a group of saurian politicians huddled behind a makeshift barricade. At the forefront stood Councillor Vex, her scales a deep shade of green that reflected her perseverance. "Human," Vex called out, her voice low but firm. "We've been monitoring your actions. Your dedication to saving saurian lives has not gone unnoticed." Steven nodded, his expression grave. "We're trying to reach the council chambers. Senator Kraz has taken hostages." Vex's eyes narrowed. "We're aware. My colleagues and I have decided to assist you. We believe in the potential of human-saurian cooperation, and we cannot allow Kraz's extremism to prevail." With Vex and her allies now part of their group, Steven and Zoe gained valuable insights into the layout of the compromised council chambers and the likely positions of Kraz's forces. As they formulated a plan, Steven's communicator chirped. Dr. Lyra's face appeared on the small screen, her expression a mix of excitement and concern. "Steven, Zoe, I've made a breakthrough. I've developed a prototype device that can amplify your biochemical interaction. It could enhance your abilities significantly." Zoe leaned in, her scales flickering with interest. "What's the catch, Doctor?" Lyra's expression grew serious. "The amplification is intense. Prolonged use could overwhelm your systems. It's risky, but it might give you the edge you need." Steven and Zoe exchanged a look, silently weighing the potential benefits against the dangers. Before they could respond, the sound of energy weapons discharge erupted from a nearby corridor. "We've got company," one of Vex's allies shouted. A group of Kraz's extremist followers rounded the corner, weapons raised. Steven and Zoe sprang into action, their movements in perfect sync. Zoe's enhanced strength and agility allowed her to close the distance rapidly, disarming two saurians before they could fire. Steven followed close behind, his touch causing disorientation in those Zoe hadn't reached. As the skirmish intensified, Steven felt a searing pain in his side. An energy blast had grazed him, leaving a nasty burn. Zoe, seeing her companion wounded, acted on instinct. She grabbed Steven's hand, and he felt a surge of energy flow through him. The pain in his side diminished, the burn healing before his eyes. "Zoe, what did you do?" Steven asked, noticing her suddenly pale scales. I'm not sure," she replied, her voice weak. "I just knew I had to help you." The saurians who witnessed this exchange looked on in awe, their weapons lowering. The sight of a saurian willingly weakening herself to heal a human was a powerful image, one that would soon spread through the complex's communication channels. As they neared the main chamber, Steven and Zoe overheard Kraz's voice, his words filled with vitriol. "We will use these hostages to ensure our world remains pure, untainted by alien influence," Kraz shouted. Steven turned to Zoe, his expression resolute. "We need to end this now. Dr. Lyra's device. I think it's time we use it." Zoe nodded, her scales shimmering with a mix of anticipation and fear. They retrieved the small, circular device from Stephen's pack and activated it. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. A surge of energy coursed through their bodies, their skin beginning to emit a soft, otherworldly glow. Stephen gasped as he felt Zoe's presence in his mind, their thoughts intertwining. "We can do this," Zoe's voice echoed in Stephen's head. With their newfound connection, they moved as one, bursting through the chamber doors. The sight that greeted them was one of chaos. Kraz stood at the center, surrounded by armed followers, with the council members huddled in a corner. The sudden appearance of the glowing human and Saurian momentarily stunned the room's occupants. Stephen and Zoe seized the opportunity, their movements a blur of synchronized action. Stephen's touch now instantly incapacitated the extremists, while Zoe's enhanced speed allowed her to disarm multiple opponents before they could react. As they fought, the hostage council members watched in amazement. The sight of human and Saurian working in such perfect harmony was a powerful testament to the potential of their cooperation. However, as the battle wore on, Stephen and Zoe began to feel the strain of their amplified connection. Stephen's vision blurred, while Zoe's movements became less fluid. Despite the growing pain, they pressed forward, determined to see their mission through. Kraz, seeing his forces rapidly dwindling, grew desperate. He pulled out a small device, his eyes wild with fury. "If I can't protect our world," he snarled, "then I'll make sure no one can." Stephen and Zoe realized with horror that it was a detonator. The entire complex and everyone in it was now at risk. As Kraz's thumb hovered over the trigger, Stephen and Zoe knew they faced their greatest challenge yet. With their amplified abilities pushed to the limit and time running out, they had to find a way to stop Kraz and save everyone in the building, all while fighting against the dangerous side effects of their enhanced bond. The fate of both species hung in the balance as Stephen and Zoe prepared for their final, desperate move. The eyes of the entire Saurian world were upon them, watching as human and Saurian stood united against a threat that would destroy them all. All, with their amplified abilities pushed to the limit and time running out, they had to find a way to stop Kraz and save everyone in the building. The air crackled with tension as Stephen and Zoe faced Kraz, their bodies radiating an otherworldly glow. The small device Dr. Lyra had given them pulsed with energy, sending waves of pain through their interconnected nervous systems. "You're too late," Kraz snarled, his thumb hovering over the detonator. "This ends now." Stephen felt Zoe's dedication surge through their link. In perfect synchronization, they lunged forward, their enhanced speed turning them into blurs of motion. Kraz's eyes widened in surprise as they closed the distance in mere seconds. But as they reached for the detonator, the strain of their amplified connection intensified. Stephen stumbled, his vision blurring. Zoe faltered, her scales paling. The device on Stephen's belt emitted a high-pitched whine, signaling its imminent overload. Kraz seized the moment of weakness, pressing the detonator. A large screen on the chamber wall flashed to life, displaying a countdown. 5 minutes until detonation. Panic erupted among the hostages. Council members scrambled for cover, their cries of fear echoing through the chamber. Stephen and Zoe exchanged a glance, their shared thoughts racing through possibilities. "The bomb," Zoe's voice resonated in Stephen's mind. "We need to find it." They scanned the room, their heightened senses working in tandem. Stephen's eyes locked onto a suspicious-looking panel near the main doors. "There," he thought, the information instantly relayed to Zoe. They sprinted towards the panel, weaving through the chaos. As they reached it, Stephen's fingers trembled as he pried open the cover, revealing a complex array of wires and circuitry. "It's more advanced than we thought," Zoe communicated, her mental voice imbued with concern. The bomb's intricate design required simultaneous actions on opposite sides. Without hesitation, they positioned themselves on either end of the device. Their hands moved in perfect harmony, inputting codes and manipulating components as if they were extensions of a single mind. The countdown continued its relentless march. 4 minutes, 3 minutes. Sweat beaded on Stephen's forehead as he fought against the increasing pain of their overloaded connection. Zoe's scales fluctuated between pale green and deep blue, reflecting her internal struggle. Suddenly, a commotion erupted behind them. Kraz, having broken free from his captors, charged towards Steven with a concealed energy weapon. "I won't let you ruin everything," he roared. Zoe sensed the danger through their link. Without breaking her focus on the bomb, she pivoted and leaped, intercepting Kraz mid-stride. They crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs. Steven felt a sharp pain lance through his side. Zoe's pain transferred through their connection. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to continue working on the bomb. 2 minutes remained. Zoe grappled with Kraz, her enhanced strength allowing her to match his desperate fury. She managed to knock the weapon from his hand, but not before a glancing blow struck her shoulder. Ignoring the searing pain, she subdued Kraz and rushed back to the bomb. 1 minute left. Steven and Zoe's hands flew over the bomb's controls, their movements becoming increasingly erratic as the strain of their amplified abilities took its toll. The glow emanating from their bodies intensified, casting harsh shadows across the chamber. With 10 seconds remaining, they input the final sequence. The bomb's display flickered, then went dark. A collective gasp of relief swept through the room. The immediate danger averted, Steven and Zoe's bodies finally gave in to the overwhelming stress. They collapsed to the ground, their limbs intertwined, still pulsating with unstable energy. Dr. Lyra burst into the chamber, followed by a team of human and saurian medical experts. "We need to stabilize them immediately," she ordered, her voice cutting through the commotion. As the medical team worked feverishly, the freed council members gathered around, their expressions a mix of awe and concern. The sight of a human and saurian lying side by side, having risked everything to save both species, left a profound impact. Councillor Vex took charge, her voice ringing out with authority. "Secure Senator Kraz and his followers. Prepare for an emergency session of the High Council." Dr. Lyra's face creased with worry as she monitored Steven and Zoe's vital signs. Their biochemical readings fluctuated wildly, defying conventional medical understanding. The glow emanating from their bodies showed no signs of diminishing. "We need to move them to a secure medical facility," Dr. Lyra announced. "Their condition is unlike anything we've seen before." As Steven and Zoe were carefully transferred to stretchers, news of their heroic actions spread rapidly across the saurian homeworld. Outside the government complex, crowds began to gather, holding impromptu vigils for the human-saurian pair who had saved their planet from disaster. Inside an adjacent secure chamber, the High Council reconvened, the gravity of the situation evident on their faces. The undeniable evidence of human-saurian biochemical compatibility and its potential dangers forced them to reevaluate their stance on interspecies relations. Meanwhile, in the medical facility, Dr. Lyra and her team worked tirelessly to stabilize Steven and Zoe. Their bodies remained interconnected by the residual energy of the amplification device, presenting unprecedented challenges for the medical staff. As Dr. Lyra pored over the data streaming from their biosensors, she noticed an anomaly. The prolonged amplification of their biochemical bond had triggered a previously unknown physiological process in both human and saurian biology. Her eyes widened as she realized the implications. This discovery, if properly understood and harnessed, could revolutionize medical science and interspecies compatibility. But first, they needed to save Steven and Zoe's lives. Dr. Lyra turned to her team, her voice filled with urgency. "We need to embrace their connection fully. It's the only way to save them, and possibly change everything we know about our species." "Species," Dr. Lyra announced, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The Saurian High Council, faced with the gravity of the situation, quickly convened to approve Dr. Lyra's radical treatment plan. Time was of the essence, and the potential for groundbreaking medical advancements outweighed any lingering doubts. Within hours, a joint human-saurian medical team assembled, pooling their collective expertise to tackle this unprecedented challenge. A secure wing of the main saurian hospital was rapidly converted into a specialized treatment facility, equipped with a fusion of cutting-edge human and saurian medical technology. As Steven and Zoe were carefully transported to the new facility, their bodies continued to pulse with unstable energy. The medical team worked feverishly, monitoring every fluctuation in their vital signs. Dr. Lyra stood at the center of the controlled chaos, her eyes darting between holographic displays of Stephen and Zoe's intertwined biosignatures. "We need to stabilize their biochemical bond," she instructed her team. "Prepare for the first energy pulse." The room hummed as the equipment powered up. A beam of carefully calibrated energy enveloped Stephen and Zoe's bodies. As it made contact, visible waves of energy flowed between them, their skin shimmering with an otherworldly light. "Incredible," Dr. Lyra murmured, watching the readouts. "Their physiologies are so intertwined that separating them could be fatal. We need to keep them in constant physical contact throughout the treatment." This decision raised eyebrows among the more conservative Saurian medical staff, but the urgency of the situation overrode any cultural hesitations. Stephen and Zoe's bodies were carefully positioned side by side, their hands clasped together. As the treatment progressed, each energy pulse sent cascades of light rippling across their skin. Gradually, their vital signs began to stabilize, and the intensity of their glow diminished. Dr. Lyra's eyes widened as she noticed an anomaly in the data. "Look at this," she called to her team, pointing to a holographic display. "Their genetic structures are changing. It's as if the prolonged amplification has triggered a series of mutations." The implications of this discovery sent shockwaves through the medical team. These mutations appeared to be enhancing Stephen and Zoe's ability to interact on a physiological level, effectively making them more compatible with each other's biology. As the treatment continued, news of the ongoing procedure spread rapidly across the Saurian homeworld. Crowds gathered outside the hospital, their faces a mix of curiosity and hope. Many Saurians, particularly those suffering from chronic illnesses, began to view this human-Saurian cooperation as a potential source of miraculous cures. Inside the treatment room, Stephen and Zoe's condition continued to improve. Their vital signs stabilized further, and the glow emanating from their bodies faded to a soft, pulsating shimmer. Suddenly, Stephen's eyes fluttered open. He blinked, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings and the sensation of Zoe's hand in his. Where am I?" he mumbled. Dr. Lyra leaned over him, her reptilian features softening with relief. "You're in a medical facility, Stephen. You and Zoe saved everyone, but the strain of your amplified abilities nearly killed you both." As if on cue, Zoe stirred beside him. Her scales rippled with a cascade of colors as she regained consciousness. "Stephen," she called out, her voice weak but filled with concern. Their eyes met and a surge of energy passed between them. The monitoring equipment beeped urgently as their vital signs spiked in unison. "Don't try to separate," Dr. Lyra warned quickly. "Your physiologies have become deeply intertwined. We're still working to understand the full extent of the changes." Stephen and Zoe exchanged a look of confusion and shock. They tried to process the implications of Dr. Lyra's words, but found themselves overwhelmed by the intensity of their connection. "I can feel everything," Zoe whispered, her eyes wide with wonder and a hint of fear. "Your thoughts, your emotions, it's all there." Stephen nodded, equally amazed and unsettled. "It's the same for me. It's like we're two halves of a whole," Dr. Lyra finished for him. "Your unique condition presents us with both an incredible opportunity and a significant challenge." As Stephen and Zoe grappled with their new reality, the implications of their condition rippled outward. The High Council, recognizing the potential impact of these developments, began drafting new legislation to regulate and facilitate human-Saurian medical cooperation. Outside the hospital, the crowds continued to grow. Protesters demanded access to human volunteers for medical treatments, while others voiced concerns about the dangers of interspecies experimentation. In the treatment room, Dr. Lyra and her team prepared for the next phase of their research. They knew that exploring the full extent of Stephen and Zoe's genetic mutations could lead to groundbreaking medical advancements. However, this research would require the couple's continued participation, raising complex ethical questions about their autonomy and obligations to both species. As Stephen and Zoe lay there, their hands still clasped tightly together, they realized that their personal journey had become inextricably linked with the future of human-Saurian relations. The weight of this responsibility settled over them, a mix of excitement and trepidation coursing through their shared connection. Dr. Lyra approached them, her expression serious. "We need to discuss the next steps," she began, her voice gentle but firm. "What we've discovered here could change everything we know about interspecies biology, but we need your help to understand it fully." Stephen and Zoe exchanged a look, their newly heightened connection allowing them to communicate without words. They knew that whatever they decided would have far-reaching consequences, not just for themselves, but for both their species and potentially the entire galaxy. Galaxy. The weight of their decision hung heavy in the air as they exchanged a meaningful glance. "We understand," Stephen said, his voice hoarse but determined. "We're ready to do whatever it takes to help both our species." Zoe nodded in agreement, her scales shimmering with a mix of anticipation and willpower. "What's the next step, Dr. Lyra?" Before Dr. Lyra could respond, a sudden wave of dizziness washed over Stephen and Zoe. Their grip on each other's hands tightened instinctively, and the monitors around them beeped urgently. "What's happening?" Stephen gasped, feeling a pull towards Zoe that was both physical and emotional. Dr. Lyra rushed to check the readings, her eyes widening as she processed the data. "Your physiological bond is intensifying. We need to run more tests to understand the full extent of these changes." Over the next few days, Stephen and Zoe underwent a battery of examinations. The medical team observed with fascination as the couple's biochemical connection grew stronger, making it increasingly difficult for them to be physically separated. During one particularly intense examination, Stephen found himself acutely aware of Zoe's presence beside him. Her scales seemed to glow with an otherworldly beauty, and he felt an overwhelming urge to be closer to her. Zoe, too, experienced a sudden surge of attraction towards Stephen, her heart racing as she took in his features. Their eyes met, and a jolt of electricity seemed to pass between them. The monitoring equipment erupted in a cacophony of beeps and alarms, drawing Dr. Lyra's attention. "Fascinating," she murmured, studying the holographic displays. "Your hormonal levels are spiking in perfect synchronization. This mutual attraction appears to be a direct result of your biochemical bond." Stephen and Zoe listened to Dr. Lyra's explanation, both struggling to process the intensity of their newfound feelings. Their previous interactions had been driven by necessity and scientific curiosity, but this was something entirely different. Dr. Lyra called an emergency meeting with her colleagues, presenting her findings and proposing a controversial experiment. "I believe that allowing Stephen and Zoe to explore their physical attraction could be crucial to stabilizing their unique physiological state," she explained. The suggestion sparked a heated debate among the medical staff and diplomatic corps. Some argued that it crossed ethical boundaries, while others saw it as a necessary step in understanding human-saurian interaction. After hours of deliberation, and with reluctant approval from both the Saurian High Council and Earth's representatives, the experiment was greenlit. Stephen and Zoe were escorted to a private room within the facility, equipped with advanced monitoring systems. As the door closed behind them, leaving them alone for the first time since their ordeal began, the air seemed to crackle with tension. "Are you sure about this?" Stephen asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zoe's scales rippled with a cascade of colors, reflecting her mix of nervousness and anticipation. "I am if you are," she replied, taking a step closer to him. As their bodies drew near, the familiar glow began to emanate from their skin. This time, however, it was softer and more harmonious. Stephen reached out, his fingers gently tracing the contours of Zoe's face. The contact sent shivers through both of them, and the monitors registered a dramatic increase in the stability of their biochemical bond. Their lips met, and the world seemed to fall away. The sensation was unlike anything either of them had experienced before, a perfect fusion of human and saurian physiology. As their intimacy deepened, the room filled with a soft, pulsating light that seemed to emanate from their very beings. Outside the room, Dr. Lyra and her team watched in amazement as Stephen and Zoe's vital signs synchronized perfectly. The genetic mutations they had observed earlier appeared to align in perfect balance, creating a harmony between human and saurian biology that had never been seen before. As the couple's encounter reached its peak, an ancient biological process, long dormant in saurian physiology, awakened. Neither Stephen nor Zoe were aware of it, but they had triggered what Saurian legends call the celestial bonding, a complete physiological and genetic synchronization between two compatible individuals. In the aftermath of their intimate encounter, Stephen and Zoe lay entwined, their bodies still glowing softly. They felt a profound connection that went beyond the physical, as if their very essences had merged. Dr. Lyra entered the room, her face a mixture of excitement and concern. "The data we've collected is extraordinary," she announced. "You've achieved a level of genetic exchange and physiological harmony that we never thought possible between a human and a Saurian." As Stephen and Zoe began to disentangle themselves, they felt an immediate sense of discomfort. The further apart they moved, the more intense the feeling became. "What's wrong?" Dr. Lyra asked, noticing their distress. "It hurts to be apart," Zoe explained, quickly moving back to Stephen's side. The moment they touched, the discomfort subsided. Dr. Lyra's eyes widened as she realized the implications. "It seems the celestial bonding has created a permanent link between you. You may no longer be able to be physically separated for extended periods." The news sent shockwaves through the facility. As word spread of the experiment's results, debates erupted across both the Saurian homeworld and Earth. Conservative factions decried the unnatural union, while others saw it as a miraculous breakthrough in interspecies relations. Stephen and Zoe found themselves at the center of a galactic controversy, grappling with the personal implications of their bond, while the world around them argued about its meaning. As they held each other close, both physically and emotionally unable to let go, they knew that their lives, in the future of human-Saurian relations, would never be the same. The intensity of their connection was both exhilarating and terrifying. As Stephen and Zoe grappled with the implications of their permanent bond, Dr. Lyra burst into the room, her scales shimmering with excitement. "We've made an incredible discovery," she exclaimed, her eyes darting between the couple and the holographic displays surrounding them. Stephen sat up, still holding Zoe's hand. "What is it, Doctor?" Dr. Lyra's tail swished as she explained. "The genetic mutations resulting from your celestial bonding. They're not just unique, they're potentially life-saving." Zoe's scales rippled with curiosity. "What do you mean?" "We've identified a protein sequence in your combined DNA that could be the key to curing the VEX-7 syndrome," Dr. Lyra said, her voice filled with awe. "It's a genetic disorder that affects both humans and Saurians. We've been searching for a cure for decades." The news sent shockwaves through the facility. Within hours, representatives from the Saurian High Council and Earth's government had convened an emergency meeting. The ethical debates surrounding Stephen and Zoe's relationship were temporarily overshadowed by the potential for groundbreaking medical advancements. Days later, Stephen and Zoe found themselves being transported to a new research facility on a neutral planet. The ship's design accommodated their need for constant proximity, with a specially designed cabin that allowed them to remain in contact during the journey. As they approached the planet, Zoe pressed her face against the viewport. "It's beautiful," she murmured, her scales shifting to match the swirling blues and greens of the world below. Stephen nodded, feeling her wonder through their bond. "A fresh start for both of us," he said softly. The new facility was a marvel of human and Saurian engineering. Their living quarters were spacious and comfortable, designed to allow for comprehensive monitoring while still providing a sense of privacy. The research areas buzzed with activity as scientists from both species worked side by side, united in their quest for medical breakthroughs. As weeks passed, Stephen and Zoe settled into a routine of examinations, tests, and monitored interactions. Their bond continued to strengthen, their bodies exhibiting increasingly synchronized biological rhythms. During one examination, Dr. Lyra noticed something unusual. "Fascinating," she muttered, adjusting the sensors on her equipment. "What is it?" Stephen asked, instinctively reaching for Zoe's hand. Dr. Lyra's eyes gleamed with excitement. "Your genetic mutations are stabilizing. You're able to spend slightly longer periods apart without experiencing severe discomfort. This could be a game changer for our research." The news sparked a flurry of activity in the facility. Dr. Lyra initiated a program to identify other potentially compatible human-Saurian pairs, hoping to replicate the benefits of Stephen and Zoe's bond without the need for permanent bonding. As volunteers began to arrive at the facility, Stephen and Zoe found themselves thrust into the spotlight. News outlets from both planets clamored for interviews and exclusive access to the couple. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of interviews, Stephen collapsed onto their bed. "I never thought I'd miss the days when we were just trying to save a ship full of diplomats," he groaned. Zoe curled up beside him, her scales cool against his skin. "At least then we only had to worry about not dying," she agreed, a hint of humor in her voice. Their moment of peace was interrupted by a chime from the communication panel. Dr. Lyra's voice filled the room. "Stephen, Zoe, we need you in the main lab. We've made another breakthrough." They hurried to the lab where Dr. Lyra and her team were gathered around a holographic display. "We've developed a method to temporarily induce a state similar to the celestial bonding in compatible pairs," she explained, her voice brimming with excitement. Stephen's eyes widened. "Without the permanent effects?" Dr. Lyra nodded. "Exactly. This could revolutionize our approach to treating a wide range of conditions." As the research progressed, the facility became a hub of activity. Volunteer pairs underwent the temporary bonding procedure, with promising initial results. Patients with previously incurable conditions showed significant improvements in their health. However, the program also revealed unexpected challenges. Some participants reported intense emotional connections during the bonding process, leading to complicated personal situations when the effects wore off. Stephen and Zoe watched as the facility grappled with these new ethical questions. Their own bond, once viewed as an anomaly, now served as a blueprint for medical advancements that could benefit both species. As public opinion began to shift more favorably towards human-saurian cooperation, Stephen and Zoe found themselves at a crossroads. Their unique bond had paved the way for unprecedented scientific advancements, but the constant scrutiny and demands of the research program were taking their toll. One night, as they stood on the balcony of their quarters, watching the alien sunset, Zoe turned to Stephen. "What do you think our next step should be?" she asked, her scales shimmering with uncertainty. Stephen gazed at the horizon, feeling the weight of their decision. "I'm not sure," he admitted, "but whatever we choose, we'll face it together." As the twin moons rose in the alien sky, Stephen and Zoe stood hand in hand, their joined silhouettes a testament to the unexpected journey that had brought them to this moment. The future of human-saurian relations hung in the balance, shaped by the choices they would make in the days to come. As they gazed at the alien sky, Stephen and Zoe knew their journey was not nearly finished. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of activity and soul-searching for the bonded pair. As they continued to participate in the research, they found themselves increasingly drawn to the idea of exploring their relationship outside the confines of the facility. One evening, after a particularly grueling series of tests, Stephen turned to Zoe, his eyes filled with a mix of drive and uncertainty. "I think it's time we made a change," he said softly. Zoe's scales rippled in agreement. "I've been feeling the same way. We've given so much to the research, but we need to live our lives too," Stephen finished for her. Their decision to step back from their roles as primary research subjects coincided with a major breakthrough in the temporary bonding technique. Dr. Lyra burst into their quarters, her tail swishing with excitement. "We've done it," she exclaimed. "The new procedure allows for wider application without permanent pairing. Your contributions have been invaluable, but I understand if you want to move on." Stephen and Zoe exchanged a look of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Doctor," Zoe said. "But before we go, is there one last thing we can do?" Dr. Lyra's eyes gleamed. "Actually, there is. We've developed a procedure that might allow you to control the intensity of your bond. Would you be willing to try it?" The couple agreed, and the next day found them in the main laboratory, surrounded by a team of human and saurian scientists. As the procedure began, Stephen felt a tingling sensation spreading from his chest to his extremities. Beside him, Zoe's scales flickered rapidly, reflecting the changes occurring within her body. When it was over, they looked at each other in wonder. Stephen reached out, touching Zoe's hand. The familiar warmth of their connection was there, but it felt different, controllable. "Try moving apart," Dr. Lyra suggested. As they took steps away from each other, they felt the expected discomfort, but it was manageable, with a thought they could intensify or diminish the bond's effects. It worked, Zoe breathed, her scales shimmering with joy. With their newfound control over their bond, Stephen and Zoe embarked on a journey across both human and Saurian worlds. They became ambassadors of interspecies cooperation, their unique relationship a living testament to the possibilities of human-Saurian harmony. Their travels took them from the towering spires of New York to the bioluminescent forests of the Saurian homeworld. Everywhere they went, they shared their experiences, answered questions, and helped foster understanding between the two species. During a visit to Stephen's hometown, they faced an unexpected challenge. As they walked through a park, enjoying the familiar sights and sounds of Earth, a group of human extremists approached them. "This ends now," one of the attackers growled, reaching for Zoe. Without thinking, Stephen stepped between them. In that moment of crisis, their bond intensified instinctively. A visible aura enveloped them, pulsing with energy. The attackers stumbled back, momentarily stunned by the display. As security forces arrived to handle the situation, Stephen and Zoe found themselves surrounded by a crowd of onlookers, many capturing the event on their devices. Within hours, footage of their bond's manifestation had spread across global news networks, becoming a powerful symbol of unity between humans and Saurians. The incident sparked a wave of support for interspecies cooperation. Both human and Saurian governments, moved by the unwavering commitment Stephen and Zoe demonstrated, agreed to establish permanent diplomatic ties. Plans were set in motion to found a joint colony on a neutral planet, designed to serve as a hub for collaborative research and cultural exchange. Months later, Stephen and Zoe found themselves back where it all began, the grand reception hall on the Saurian homeworld. The room buzzed with excitement as representatives from both species gathered for a historic ceremony. As they stood before the assembled dignitaries, Stephen squeezed Zoe's hand. She looked at him, her scales shimmering with a kaleidoscope of emotions. Together, they announced their decision to undergo a traditional Saurian bonding ritual, officially uniting their lives in the eyes of both species. The ritual began, broadcast to billions across human and Saurian worlds. As ancient words were spoken and sacred symbols traced in the air, Stephen and Zoe felt their bond deepen in ways they had never experienced before. The familiar glow emanated from their bodies, growing brighter with each passing moment. As the ceremony reached its climax, they turned to face each other. Stephen's eyes met Zoe's, and in that moment, all the challenges they had faced, all the obstacles they had overcome, seemed to fall away. They were simply two beings, united in love and purpose. The officiator's voice rang out, declaring their union complete. As applause filled the hall, Stephen and Zoe shared a tender kiss, their bodies pulsing with the now familiar light of their connection. Later, as the celebration continued around them, they slipped away to a quiet balcony overlooking the Saurian capital city. The light of two setting suns painted the sky in brilliant hues, mingling with the glow of the city's advanced technology. Stephen wrapped his arm around Zoe, marveling at how far they had come. "Who would have thought," he said softly, "that my clumsy attempt to help you at that reception would lead to all this?" Zoe laughed, her scales shimmering with joy. "It was the best shock of my life," she replied, pulling him close for another kiss. As they stood there, silhouetted against the fading light of day, they knew that their journey was far from finished. The future stretched out before them, filled with challenges and possibilities. But whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, a living bridge between two worlds, united by a bond that transcended species. The suns dipped below the horizon, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. In the growing twilight, Stephen and Zoe's gentle glow seemed to pulse in harmony with the city lights, a beacon of hope for the future of human-Saurian relations.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.